So in this session, we will discuss about the basic concepts of structural design, some of the key terminology which is associated with the structural analysis and design process. We will also have an overview of the basic seismic structural design philosophies and what are different approaches used in the design of especially reinforced concrete components. So let's start this discussion. If we look at the overall structural engineering spectrum and some of the basic things which we are currently dealing with in this profession is that the activities mostly can be classified under the conception of structural design. In this process, obviously, we have to conceive the overall structural form and overall structural system. Then analysis, structural design, and then finally structural detailing. And there are some other activities also involved in the same domain. If we look at the structures which we deal with, they can be buildings, bridges, trusses, shell structures, towers, and also some other kinds of structures, for example, highway structures, hydraulic structures, and some other structures. The structural design codes which we may use may have different families of building codes, including American, British, European, Euro codes, Japanese and Korean codes, and some other codes also. We will see in one separate session what are different structural design codes which are available and what are their purpose, what things they cover. Our materials are concrete, pre-stressed concrete, steel, timber, and so on. The structural models which we construct for the purpose of structural analysis can be two-dimensional frame structures or truss structures, and can be three-dimensional simple structures, and can be the very detailed finite element three-dimensional models. The structural analysis procedures which we currently conduct for the purpose of structural design can be linear static, can be non-linear static. Obviously, as the name indicates, the linear static means that the applied loading is assumed to remain static, and the structural model which is constructed for this analysis is linear structural model. Then non-linear static, linear dynamic, and then there are some special analysis procedures, for example, large displacement analysis, which considers the equilibrium of our structure in its deformed shape. The solution methods which we may use for analyzing our computer models can be, for example, the simple closed form solutions, can be the finite element solutions, and can be some specialized algorithms which we may program ourselves and we can analyze using them. So this is an overall domain, an overall spectrum of some of the things which we deal as a structural engineer. So if we look at the activities, a structural designer obviously will be a part of a structural design office, which itself have its own domain of activities. For example, the client dealing obviously will not be the primary role of structural designer. The design office on his behalf may deal with client coordination, office management, design management, all of these things. The design office or some key principal investigator other than structural designer may handle. But some specific activities which the structural engineer is responsible for may include the conception of the overall form and geometry of the structure, structural analysis, primarily structural design process after the analysis, then converting the design outputs into structural drawings and detailing, and then finally structural engineer may also be involved in the costing process. So these are few broad activities in which the typical structural design office is involved. If we look at the role of computer-aided design in the current structural engineering practice. The overall process starts with the conception, and we can see here that the computers uh, cannot much help in this, because here you have to actually decide about the overall structural form and overall structural geometry. What structural system is most suitable for a particular building or of a particular purpose, having a specific function. Here, the computer-aided design may not help much, because this is something which the architect and structural engineer is mostly have to handle themselves. And then the analysis part is the one which mostly is handled by the computer-aided design or computer-aided analysis. Then design also, there are some tools available nowadays which can perform an integrated analysis and design process. So after the analysis we have design and then detailing also. Currently there are some commercial programs available which can even perform detailing on your behalf. For example, CSI Detail is a specific program for the purpose of detailing. Obviously uh, you have to check it and view it critically, whatever the outputs of different drawing sheets which are automatically created by these computer aided detailing programs. Then there are some interrelated activities or some interrelated you can say activities. For example, the electrification, the plumbing and all those activities which are interdisciplinary in nature. Structural engineer and computer aided design may have role in that also. There may be some expert systems installed within a particular building, or maybe some auxiliary services, for example the service core, the lift system itself, and some other uh, auxiliary services which a particular building project may have. But the most you can say in broader perspective, the computer aided design mostly helps in the analysis, structural analysis part, structural design, and sometimes also structural detailing. If we look at the reinforced concrete buildings, some basic terminology, we know already about what is beam and what is a column, for example. But look at, for example, slab on grade, a slab which is obviously, as the name indicates, which is at the basement level, which is resting exactly on the underneath soil. Then we may have different kinds of footing within one structure. For example, for columns we may have spread footing or isolated footing, but for walls we may have wall footing. We may have different kinds of walls within one structure. For example, between reinforced concrete moment resisting frames, we may have masonry infill walls, but we may also have the reinforced concrete walls as foundation walls or retaining walls. We may have spandrel beams, but we may also have the reinforced concrete lintels over all the openings. Similarly, we may have different kinds of slabs within one structure. We may have the joist slab or reinforced concrete rectangular slab. We may also have a staircase which is primarily made from reinforced concrete, having a particular landing at certain level. So within one structure we may have several different types of elements to deal with within one reinforced concrete structure. Similarly, some other terminology related to reinforced concrete buildings especially. For example, we may have flat plate where we have the columns which are directly supporting the reinforced concrete slab. We may also have flat slab where there are column capitals which are the extended portion of column, and then we may also have the drop panels. This part is drop panel. It is a pedestal of reinforced concrete which is supporting the slab. So if we have this situation where we have column capitals and drop panels, then we call that structural system as flat slab structural system. But if we have the reinforced concrete column directly supporting the reinforced concrete slab, we call it the flat plate system. We may have exterior and interior columns. We may have a pedestal which is actually increasing the area of contact between column and the spread footings. So we may have column capitals on top, and we may have column pedestals at the bottom. All of these are reinforced concrete elements. We may also have column bracket, which is also an extended part of the column cross section near the uh, contact between column and slab. So if we define a structural system or a structure, we may call it as an assemblage of physical components or elements, each of which could further be a structure itself, signifying the complexity of the system. So a structural system is an assembly of different physical elements which work together or act together, behave together to perform an intended function. So if we look at different forms of members or different shapes of components of structures, we may classify them into bar elements, elements which have one dimension longer than the other two dimensions. We may have cable elements which can sustain a particular action only, for example, tension only, flat surface, curved surface, and solid objects. These are the very first classification based on forms of different structural components. Based on these physical, structural, and member types, we may classify based on these forms. For example, we may have cable structures, skeletal structures, which means that they are made of different line elements or one-dimensional elements. Spatial structures, which are made of you can say two-dimensional area elements. Solid structures, primarily made of the three-dimensional solid objects or components, or any combination of these. So if we look at a real reinforced concrete building, you may have all of these components within one building. For example, you may have a reinforced concrete frame, which itself is a skeletal structure. But you may also have the reinforced concrete walls, and similarly slabs also are basically the spatial elements. And then in the footing, if you have a very thick reinforced concrete footing, then you may model it or you may idealize that as the solid structure. So it may comprise of different solid elements. So within one real structure, you may have more than one kinds of different shapes or forms of these components. So our primary purpose of structural analysis is that on one side, if we have a real structure, and here we have different types of excitations which our structure may experience during its design life. These excitations not only include loads but also different types of vibrations, settlements, or thermal changes. We have these excitations, we apply them to a real structure, in fact a mathematical representation of a real structure, and we finally come up with its responses. That may be the displacements, strains, stresses, and stress resultants. So this is our overall story for structural analysis, that we have excitations, we have a representation of different excitations, we have a set of different responses which indicate the behavior of a particular system or structure, and in between them is our structural analysis. So this is our structural analysis domain. This is our structural analysis domain. But we cannot perform this process unless we have a mathematical representation of this real structural geometry and connectivity and everything. So if we talk about the structural elements which we actually use to represent this real structure, because the real geometry of a real reinforced concrete structure have to be actually simplified for the purpose of this structural analysis. So we classify based on the different geometries of structural analysis for the purpose of structural analysis basically. So if we have a real continuum which may have any shape, we may classify it into some regular solid or into these surface or two-dimensional elements, which may include the membrane, plate, and shell. I will explain this terminology later also. If two dimensions are significantly larger than the third dimension, it is actually the surface type element. And if one dimension is larger than the other two, then it is a line type element. And if all three are comparable, or they are not significantly different, then in that case it will be a regular solid object. So on one side we have different structural forms, and we have different structural components, geometries also. So based on different forms, we classify sometimes based on the behavior of a particular element, sometimes based only on the geometry. So this figure shows what types of structures are available and what are some of their basic components which we may have. For example, a spherical dome, it is completely made of special spherical shell structure. Similarly, plane trusses or plane frames, they are skeletal form. Similarly, three-dimensional frame buildings are skeletal form. Then we may have shells with different curved shapes, storage structures, and then we may have different kinds of cross-sectional shapes of different beams and columns. We may have different types of girders having different cross-sectional shapes. Transmission tower is also a skeletal structure. Then different complex shapes, for example, hyperbolic paraboloid. It's a very complex curved shell shape, different kinds of prisms, and different other shells with variable thicknesses and variable properties, for example. So we may use all of these basic forms and shapes to actually construct our computer models for the purpose of structural analysis. Each reinforced concrete member actually have a cross section. And generally the word cross section is associated with line type or beam type members, one-dimensional elements. So each one-dimensional element obviously will have a cross section. So this shape, this particular shape is called cross section. This is called the cross-sectional plane, which is perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of that member. But we can also use the word cross-section for even area type elements, two-dimensional elements. For example, a slab will also have a cross-section. So this is slab's cross-section, but generally the two-dimensional element, their cross-sectional shape only requires the description about their thickness. So the word cross-section is mostly associated with the line type elements, where you have a specific shape which actually runs along the length to make that member. So the design of a line type member often means the design of its cross section. So when we talk about the design of a beam, we actually mean that what cross sectional shape it should have, what dimensions that shape should have, what amount of steel it should have. So it means that the length property of the member, it is automatically fixed. It is already fixed when you fix the form and shape of the overall structure, when you decide about different span lengths and everything. So the length property is already there. All you have to design is the cross section. So which means that you have to select an appropriate dimension, proportion and materials used at the cross section level. So this is what I mean by the design of line type members, which means the design of their cross sections. The cross section itself is made of different materials, and the list of different structural materials is already there in front of you. You can see that we may have cross sections made of concrete, reinforcement steel can also be embedded in that to make reinforced concrete, pre-stressed steel, hot rolled structural steel, which means different structural sections which may be embedded or may be used separately, cold form steel, aluminium and other metals and structural timber, and the list goes on. So we may have composite cross sections made of more than one type of material. So this is the whole list of structural materials which we may be dealing with. But obviously in this course we will primarily focus on reinforced concrete, which means the concrete sections or cross members which have the reinforcing steel as the primary tension taking part of the cross section. Here, before going actually to the design discussion, let's quickly clearly differentiate between the analysis and design process so that you don't mix it at later stage. By analysis, I mean to determine the response of structure against any excitation. This part of the whole process in structural engineering domain is called structural analysis. For example, a structure is given, an initial geometry and initial sizes are given, which are trial sections, not final sections, and the applied loading is also given, and you are required to actually analyze the computer model of your structure to come up with the responses. Then after the analysis, you get the design actions. Those responses, especially the force responses, becomes the design action. Then we go for the second part of the process, and that is structural design, where we ensure that the structure can sustain the excitation with an acceptable level of response. So first we have a trial geometry. Trial geometry is actually applied with different excitations. So we apply those excitations to the trial geometry as part of the structural analysis process, and we get the response. So those responses can be displacement responses or displacement related responses, and can be force responses or force related responses. So when I say force response or force related response, it means all the axial forces, bending moments, shear forces, torsional moments, etc., etc., everything. Displacement related responses may include displacement, drifts, rotations, curvature, and everything. So those responses becomes the design actions. So once we get the response values, we then ensure that we have enough structural capacity which can sustain those responses against a particular excitation. The process of ensuring that the particular geometry and particular arrangement of materials have that capacity to sustain those responses, that process is called structural design. So if we summarize that particular difference, we will see that what are the unknowns or outputs, you can say, in structural analysis, they becomes the known or inputs for structural design. For example, in structural analysis, the element and member actions and forces and displacements, everything is an output of the analysis. But this becomes the input for structural design, and the output for structural design is the member cross section, element cross section, the amount of reinforcement, and the cross sectional properties, for example geometry and everything. So this is the output of structural design. The structural analysis is fairly general. It has a unified mathematical theory based on the finite element model or boundary element model. But structural design process doesn't have a unified theory. It depends on a particular building code. It depends on what structural material you are using for your structure, and then it depends on what design approach you are using, which we will be discussing in next few slides, and what structural members you are using to actually resist or sustain those responses. What are local construction techniques and practices? These also affect the process of structural design. And then finally you come up with the final cross-section shape and geometry and amount of reinforcement. So this is the difference between structural analysis and design. For structural analysis, you must have a trial geometry, a trial shape of the building or cross-section sizes and everything. So if in the output you come to know that a particular cross-section shape is not enough to sustain those responses which are calculated as an output of structural analysis, then you change that trial geometry and repeat that process. So in a sense, this is a cyclic process. It is not just one-way process. You have to first start with a trial geometry and then check whether that geometry is providing you enough capacity to sustain the responses or not. If not, then you change the trial geometry again and repeat that process. Let's talk about the analysis process itself. Obviously, we will not go into detail, but maybe 2-3 slides about that. Currently the real structure with all those complexities and different complex shapes and forms, the real behavior of a structure is actually governed by different partial differential equations of different orders. For example, here you can see a partial differential equation which is actually an equilibrium equation, which is saying that sum of all the forces, the external and internal forces for a structure is 0. So it's an equilibrium equation and it is in the form of partial differential equation. And the solution for such partial differential equations for different real structural geometries, irregular geometries, is only possible for these simple cases. For example, simple boundary condition. If the geometry is not that complex, the loading is not that complex, so the direct solution is only possible for very simple cases, limited cases. For practical purpose, we do not actually construct partial differential equations for our real structures and then try to solve them. What we do is that we use a simplified representation of our real structure. We call it the structural model, the mathematical model of the structure. And currently we use computers for this purpose, that we actually construct the three-dimensional geometry in a computer-aided design environment, and then the structural analysis program actually converts it into a mathematical model. So the whole process of structural analysis actually is based on a structural model. We cannot actually analyze the complete detailed dynamics of a real structure with its real complex geometry. We have to idealize a real structure into what we call as a structural model. And therefore, we actually come up with different, you can say, finite elements which actually we use to represent different structural components in real structure. And we construct those components in a computer-aided design environment, and those are divided into different finite elements which the computer solves for the purpose of structural analysis. So the summary is that the structural model is a mathematical compromise. You can say it is a compromise between the real structure and its mathematical representation. So it's an idealized or simplified version, mathematical version of your real structure. If we look at the applied actions or loads which we may have on our structures, they can be classified into direct loads or indirect loads. One classification is this one, that direct loads means the forces and different, you can say, shapes and forms of forces which are applied directly to our structural component. Indirect means that, for example, imposed deformations, uneven support settlements, shrinkage load, for example, is indirect load. Another classification can be permanent, variable, and accidental. Permanent, for example, self-weight. Variable also can again have fixed or free, which will vary its amplitude with time. So it can be completely random, it can be having a particular pattern. For example, train load on a bridge is a fixed amount, but it varies with time, obviously is a moving load. And then we may also have the extreme cases, for example, accidental loads, explosion, collisions, collapse of a particular element causes a certain load on another element. Another classification can be static and dynamic. Static means not time dependent, constant throughout the time, and dynamic means that they are time dependent. For example, earthquakes are the loads which are fluctuating in time. Wind loads and impact loads also are loads which fluctuate with time. But for example, live load or dead load, they are assumed to remain static throughout the design life. So the The document which we will be using to actually uh, come up with the structural design loads will be ASCE 7-16. Its title is Minimum Design Loads for Buildings and Other Structures. So this will be the primary reference which we will be using to get the structural design loads. Now let's come back to the original discussion, which was the structural design process itself. Our prime concern in this process is that the external actions should be balanced with the internal stress resultants. I just give you an example that how the sum of all the moments in a particular cross section, moments of all the forces in a particular cross section is the internal stress resultant. In case of flexure, as I have said earlier also, that for example, if you have a particular beam cross section with some amount of reinforcement and the material properties and dimensions, everything is given, let's say. So what we can do is that against a particular applied loading, we may have a strain profile. We may also have a failure strain profile corresponding to the ultimate state of this cross section. So what we can do is that we can convert that strain profile into stress profile using the stress strain material models, and then we can convert it into force profile, for example the compression in concrete, tension in steel, and then we can take the moment sum about the neutral axis or about one of these forces, and then we calculate the internal stress resultant. Now this, if the strain profile is a failure strain profile, the starting strain profile is a failure strain profile, then this Mn is the moment capacity of your cross section. So if for example this corresponds to some strain in concrete and this corresponds to epsilon y yield strain in the steel bars, in that case the the moment sum which you will get at the end of this process will be the nominal moment capacity. The stress resultant will be the moment capacity. Similarly, you may also have another moment which is the result of the external actions, that is represented by mu. So the design is all about balancing this Mn with mu. Now just think about the construction of this Mn. What actually contributed in this Mn? You had some effective depth, you had some width of the cross section, you have some Fc prime of your concrete, you have some Fy of your steel. All of those things, material properties, cross sectional properties, amount of steel As and amount of steel in the compression side As prime, all of those parameters actually contributed to this Mn. So the moment capacity or the internal stress resultant is contributed by all of these input parameters: cross-sectional shape, cross-sectional geometry, material properties, amount of steel, everything. So if you just remember the process of whole flexural theory, you will see that how to, when you calculate Mn or internal stress resultant, all of these parameters play their role. If you remember, you used to have the Whitney stress block to idealize the ultimate strain stress profile into, you idealize it into an equivalent rectangular stress block, because actually in the ultimate state, the stress profile is parabolic and not triangular. So you idealize that into an equivalent rectangle, and all of those parameters which I mentioned here, they are used in that idealization, and then you finally balance C and T to get the neutral axis, and then take their moment sum to get Mn. So this Mn actually is the internal stress resultant, and it is contributed by all of those parameters which constitute the overall moment capacity. So let me call it moment capacity. Moment capacity of my beam. If I change the amount of reinforcement here, the Mn will change. If I change B and D, Mn will change. If I change Fc prime or Fy, Mn will again change. Now you have another moment quantity for the same cross section, but it is coming from entirely different process. that is coming from structural analysis, and that is the moment demand. Moment demand. Actually, this MU is coming from another process, and that is structural analysis. And that is that you have a particular beam length, you have a particular applied loading, you have a particular support conditions, you perform structural analysis, and you finally get a moment peak value MU. And if these are the WU, which means the factored loads, the ultimate moment you get is MU. So this MU along the length, it will be the maximum value which will occur along the length, the peak of the bending moment diagram. That will be coming from structural analysis. So from structural analysis. Now the design is all about balancing these two quantities. And this moment is just one example. This can be said about shear also, can be said about the axial load also, can be said about torsion also. So the moment capacity coming from the material properties, amount of steel, everything is Mn. The moment demand is coming from the applied loading side by considering the length of the element, boundary conditions, and the whole structural analysis purpose. If it was obviously a indeterminate beam, you would have a different structural analysis methodology for that. If this beam is part of a complete three-dimensional frame building, the structural analysis would have become more complex. But the ultimate output would be MU, and that MU will be compared with Mn. You balance these two and your design is okay. So how we achieve that equation actually in the real design process, that we say that Mn, which is the moment strength or moment capacity, should be equal to Mu with some margin of safety. That margin of safety or factor of safety can be either applied to Mn, can be applied to Mu, or can be applied to both. Obviously, when you apply to Mn, you tend to reduce that capacity so that there is some reserve strength available. If you apply to Mu, you apply to increase that load effect or demand. So it will be greater than 1. If you apply to Mn, it will be less than 1. Or you can do both things, slightly increase the load effect and slightly reduce the capacity. So this is the overall design equation. Whatever code expression you will pick for the purpose of structural design, which will say that quantity should be greater than or equal to this quantity, you will see that on one side there is a capacity quantity and on the other side there is a demand quantity. So all the code expressions can either be their root is actually balancing these two effects. The capacities should be balanced with demands. So here if I represent the strength with S and action with A. So please note down that this A is not applied loading, it is load effect. This demand is actually load effect of the load, not the load itself. For example, when we design, we don't design based on the applied UDL or point load or triangular load. We design for the maximum moment which is produced as the result of structural analysis carried for those loads. So action doesn't mean, or demand doesn't mean the applied load itself, it means the effect of that load or load effect. So sometimes I will use the word action, sometimes I will use the word demand or load effect. All of those things would mean the final outcome of the structural analysis purpose, which means the maximum moment, maximum shear, or some other quantity also, which can be the result of structural analysis. It can be even displacement. For example, I can say that the maximum displacement which can be safely sustained by our structure should be greater than what displacement is produced by the applied loading. This can also be a design equation. But we cannot simply equate them, we have to have a factor of safety also. So the general approach is that for forces, we apply this equation. For displacements, we just check that they should be under the allowable limits. And those allowable limits are also based on the same idea that the allowable displacement limit will be the safe amount of displacement which our structure will be able to sustain, and any displacement produced by the applied loading which is more than that will not be safe. So even those checks are also based on the same balancing of external actions and internal stress resultants or internal actions. So what we generally do in our structural proportioning is that we apply this equation for forces or force related responses, and then we check for deflections, deformations, vibrations, crack widths, and for other you can say limit states or other failure modes. So we check for these things and we explicitly ensure the safety against forces, moments, shears and everything. So based on the primary design equation, we can have three basic approaches. Strength should be greater than actions, or resistance should be greater than load effects, same thing, or in other words, the capacity should be greater than or equal to demand. All three are the same form of the same equation. So strength and actions can be related by having a factor of safety on the strength side, can have the factor of safety on the action side, and can have the factor of safety on both sides. Strength can be reduced by a factor of safety, by a different factor of safety, and the actions can be amplified by a different factor of safety. If we go for this approach, where we apply the factor of safety only to the strength side and we keep the actions as it is, we will call it the working strength design or allowable stress design. So this action will be our, you can say, coming from the structural analysis, and we ensure that it should not exceed the strength, reduced strength by a factor of safety. So for example, if I talk about the stress strain curve, if let's say on y-axis you have a stress in a particular material and strain in a particular material on x-axis, in that case, if let's say your material remains elastic for a particular level of stress and then becomes plastic or non-linear, all we are doing here in this case is that we are limiting the value of applied action up to some safe value of strength which we can think of by reducing the actual strength. So if this is our actual strength, actual yield point, we reduce it to a certain level, maybe this level, and then we say that no action should be more than this reduced level. So this number is actually S over FOS. This original strength was somewhere higher. So when we are applying this equation for the purpose of proportioning our elements or material, we are saying that if any action have a value greater than S over FOS, then we have to increase the cross-sectional size. No action should be allowed to exceed this number, S over factor of safety. So we are not going beyond this S over factor of safety. We are not going to the actual S anyways. We are always reducing, or we are always, you can say, not allowing our action to exceed this number. Sometimes it is also called as the allowable stress design, because we already have decided that this much should be the maximum stress which is allowable in that material. If the stress exceeds that number, increase the cross-sectional size or increase the amount of steel or do any design change to keep the stress within this allowable limit. So this is my allowable range of stress, which is actually dictated or controlled by the strength divided by the factor of safety. On the other side, we may have another approach called the load factor design, where we just use the original strength but we amplify the applied actions by a factor of safety. This is not very popular. The most popular is this middle approach, which is called the ultimate strength design, where we use a different factor of safety to reduce strength, at the same time a different factor of safety to amplify the actions. So in different contexts, this approach have different name. For example, it may also be called as the limit state design or partial factor of safety design. Most commonly, it is called as the ultimate strength design. So let's discuss about these different types of these procedures, seismic structural design philosophies. So currently we know now that structural design is a process of proportioning the structure to safely resist the applied forces in the most cost effective and friendly manner. So on one side we have the load effects, moments and shears and everything. We have different practical requirements. This is the very first time we are discussing that we may have different practical requirements from different site conditions and the construction practices. For example, we may have different constraints also which we may have to consider while proportioning our structure. So load effects is just one aspect. We may also have different design constraints also. We perform that structural design process and ultimately our output would be material specifications, cross-sectional details, member sizes and configurations. Sometimes we may get to know at the end of the design process that the initial material which we were using, a particular FC prime and a particular FY, will no longer work for our design constraints and requirements and for our loads. So we may have to revise our material specifications as a design output. We may also have to revise our cross-sectional details from the trial values, and we may also have to finalize the member sizes and configurations. Configurations also, sometimes the design output also requires to change a particular orientation of a member or a particular size of a member. So the overall design process is conception, structural form and shape and overall geometry. Obviously the architect will have more role in this. Then structural modeling, structural analysis, structural design, detailing, drafting and finally costing. Now generally we think that this is just one way process, but actually there can be certain, you can say, cycles also in that and revisions also. So it is not just one way. For example, a particular cost implication may force you to modify a particular design decision. So in that case, you will go up in this sequence of different actions. So it is an integrated process. It is not just one way step-by-step process. A particular cost implication can you convince you to actually change a particular design decision which you may have taken at the start. So when we say that actually these are two different steps, discrete steps, actually they are all connected. So they are not discrete steps of the overall process, they are all connected. The summary of overall process, whether it is any structural system or anything, the broader summary will be like this, that you will be having the architectural functional plans and the overall structural system description. This is called the conceptual design. And as I have said earlier, that in most of the cases, the architect already do it for you. So you already get the basic architectural plans and shape and form of the building. Then the modeling and analysis phase requires you to come up with the trial sections, trial member sections, because the geometry, overall geometry is already given by the architect. But now you have to come up with trial sections which you think will be adequate for this first trial geometry. You model those cross sections, you model that complete geometry, and then you analyze by applying different loads, and the analysis results are used to perform the member level design, beams, columns, footings, slab, and if that design output is acceptable, you go for detailing. If it is not acceptable, for example, if you as part of the member design you calculate Mn for your trial cross section and trial reinforcement amount, and you come to know that it is not equal to, or it is less than Mu, for example, it means that the primary design equation is not satisfied. So generally, if instead of actually comparing these two for trial reinforcement. Sometimes you also equate them with factor of safety and calculate that amount of steel which ensures that equality. For example, you say that phi mn, a strength reduction factor times mn, is equal to mu, where mu is already coming from the factored loads. Now based on that equality, you come up with AS, the amount of steel which will actually balance that equation. So this is how in direct approach you calculate the amount of steel. But obviously you have to first fix the cross section shape. The B and D values for a beam cross section, they have to be fixed in order to calculate AS. So ideally our primary design outputs are the cross sectional dimensions and the amount of steel in both tension and compression. But what we do is that we just fix few things and calculate the remaining things directly by applying the design equation. So if there is any revision in the cross-sectional shape which is required, for example, the calculated amount of steel is not being accommodated in the given cross-sectional size. You calculate a steel which cannot be given or provided in that B and D. In that case, you have to revise the cross-sectional dimensions. So then in that case, you come back to the same modeling process, change the required elements and members, and then repeat that process. Until it is satisfied, then you go for a detailing, and then you draft the final implementation drawings and give the design or that calculations and drawings to the field where they can be implemented. So there can be two approaches in this, as I have said in the last slide also. If I go back and highlight that part again, one approach is that you start with the trial reinforcement and calculate Mn, which is the capacity, then perform analysis and calculate Mu, which is the demand, and then compare them. Another approach is a direct approach where you directly equate them and calculate that amount of steel which satisfies that equation. Similarly, here also you can have two approaches, the response and design. One option is that you go from loads to the material capacity. For example, you start with the applied loads. You have a particular beam with some given support conditions, let's say, and you are given with some applied loading WU. You perform structural analysis. You calculate the member actions, for example, the maximum moment MU. Then member actions can be converted into cross-section actions. Then cross-section actions can be converted into material actions and material stresses and strains. So let's say that this WU which is applied in your beam, finally at the end of this whole process, you come to know that my steel is going to have a strain epsilon T greater than 0.003, which is considered generally to be the failure strain of concrete. If you come to know this, that at material level your material is going to fail because of that applied loading, and then you decide that you have to change the cross-section shape or amount of steel or any other design input, basically any other design variable, so that your material finally comes in to the allowable strain or stress range. This is one approach for design, that you think based on materials. On the other side, what you can do is that you start with the material response and finally go up to the final load capacity. That, for example, you start with epsilon C equal to 0.003. You fix it that your concrete have this strain, convert that strain into section response, then member response, then full structure response, and finally calculate what is the safe value of applied loading which corresponds to this epsilon C equal to 0.003. Finally, you come up with that WU which will actually produce this much strain in your concrete material. So here you started with WU and finally come to the epsilon C. But here you started with epsilon C and go to WU. Both of these approaches are sometimes used in structural design. Sometimes you start with applied loading and go to the material level response through going through all that process. And finally you come to know that your material is overstressed. You need to change the cross section or any other design variable. And another approach could be that you start with the allowable material response, the maximum material response which your material may sustain, and then back calculate the applied loading which can be applied safely to your structure. Then compare this load capacity with the WU value, which is the actually applied load. If WU is greater than load capacity, your material is going to get overstressed. If WU is less than load capacity, then your design, the initial design may be okay. So both of these approaches are used in different contexts in the reinforced concrete elements. One concept which is also necessary in this whole structural design domain is the action sets. You are already familiar with the load actions. We know that the applied loading can be, for example, in the form of point loads. It can be in the form of uniformly distributed load or area load, for example. This is the real applied loading representing dead load or any other load. These loading actually make load cases. For example, all those uniformly distributed load on all the slabs may form one load case of the dead load type or the live load type, for example. So you may have a dead load comprising of all the area loads on the slabs, for example. You may have a live load type again comprising of different area load on different slabs, for example. So the actual load values, they are, when they are classified into different types, they become load cases. Now different types of loads, when they are combined for the purpose of calculating the design actions, because when I say this WU which actually cause an MU in my beam, that WU is not just one type of load. It is a combination of different types of load, for example, dead load, live load, earthquake load, wind load, and some other kinds of load also. So different types of loads are combined actually in the load combinations, and building codes actually give us an idea about what load combinations we should use for the purpose of structural design. Now once you have load combinations, for example dead plus live plus, let's say, earthquake, etc., then you have two approaches. One is that you just go for the design envelopes, which means that you uh, take the worst MU, the maximum MU caused by that particular combination. In fact, you have a list of all those combinations as prescribed in different building codes, and then you take the maximum MU or the worst MU value which is produced by the list of all those combinations, the critical load combination, the MU value you take and then use it as the design action, design based on that MU value. The second option is that you extract the action sets. For example, let's talk about columns where you don't have only one design action. You have the axial load P, PU caused by the affected loads, and also MU which is caused by the affected loads, the maximum moment. Now this whole, both quantities, this whole pair is actually your design action. Now what can happen now is that in one particular load combinations you have maximum MU, but for another load combination you have the maximum PU. So one option could have been that you just take the maximum MU from one combination and maximum PU from another combination and design that column based on that PU and MU pair. That would have been using design envelopes. Another parallel option can be that you pick the MU value corresponding, the maximum MU value corresponding to that controlling load combination, and then use the same PU value from the same combination, although it is not maximum, and take that MU and PU as one action set. So MU1, PU1 will be your one action set, and then perform the design. Then what you can parallel do is that take that load combination which was causing the maximum PU, and take the moment MU also corresponding to the same load combination, and take that pair as another action set. So MU2 and PU2 will be another action set, and perform the design for that. And then based on the you can say maximum values, based on the design which is more safe, which provides more safety, you check, you finally use that design. So in fact, the idea of action sets is to take out different action values as one set completely, not take out the envelope values from different load combinations, but design for each action set separately and finalize that design which seems more safe. So MU1 may be the maximum moment, PU2 may be the maximum axial force, but you don't design for MU1, PU2 in this approach. You design for maximum moment and the corresponding axial force in that same load combination. Similarly, you design for PU2, but the maximum moment in that same load combination, the moment caused by the same load combination. So both of these action sets can be separately used for design, and then you go for the final design, you can say action.